Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning into the podcast, whether you're viewing it from YouTube or listening to it from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, we welcome you. And we hope that today's episode is one that you will find informative, enlightening, and insightful. And for our returning listeners and viewers of the podcast, as always, I thank you and appreciate the support. And just as a reminder, for those who haven't done this yet, please hit that red subscribe button if you're watching from YouTube so you can get future notifications of new episodes of the podcast. Also, if you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of those other streaming platforms, make sure you subscribe there as well. And of course, we always welcome any monetary donations to this platform so we can continue to bring more innovative and phenomenal educators to this space. So if you're on Cash App, the handle is $IDTALK4ED. And if you're on Venmo, the handle will be Kwame SM. That is @ KWAMESM. And if you want to just check past episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at identitytalk4educators.com. Thank you kindly. Now, we are about 128 episodes into this podcast, and this is probably the first episode. No, this is definitely the first episode where we're going to be talking about French. We've had episodes where we focus on world languages, but mostly around Spanish and other languages. So I'm personally excited about this episode because usually when I bring people on, it's folks that I meet for the first time on social media, and it's usually a cold DM asking them to come on this platform to share their story. But this brother that I'm bringing on is actually somebody who I know, somebody who I've actually seen grow and develop into this educator that he is today, someone that I actually spent classes with at college. Like, I know this brother, and he is special, man, with the way that he's really centering the African experience in the French language classroom, which we're going to talk about today. So he's going to share his story, and without further ado, I want to bring on my brother, Mr. Ben Tinsley, to the podcast to share his story and a lot of the work that he's doing in education space and beyond. So let's bring Ben on. Brother, man.
Kwame, good to see you, bro.
Man, good to see you too, man. And so for the listeners and viewers, so Ben and I, we attended college together at Temple University
Yeah,
out in
buddy, to
Philly.
you.
Yes, sir. Go Owls. And if I'm not mistaken, we first met in, I believe, a hip hop class.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that was
It
my
was hip
freshman year.
hop
I don't know.
class. Your
I think you
freshman
were a
year,
year
and it
ahead of
was
me,
my
but yeah.
junior year.
Okay, gotcha.
So
Yeah.
I was a couple years ahead, and that's when I was able to first capture the brilliance of Ben Tinsley. And then, of course, over time, you learn more things about him. You know, of course, musician. So he was doing gigs and stuff, doing his Eric Benet thing at that time, and doing all kinds of other stuff, man. But no, this brother is a multi-hyphenate in every sense of the word. And it's always great to have folks that you already know. So, man, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And to your point, like we go back, man, we got a lot of history, and I'm
Go
just so
back.
proud of what you've been doing and
Yes,
the
sir.
platform that you created, and for you to share that with me, to offer that to me in this moment, man. I'm just grateful. So.
Yeah, man. And considering that French is the language that I learned growing up,
Yeah.
it's always good to just be with somebody that actually teaches the language. It allows me to reminisce about my
Yeah,
days in the French class.
sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mon frère. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
to get us started, we always like to start from the beginning because it is identity talk. So this is about your story, like who
Yeah.
you are to the core.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know, if I'm not mistaken, you're a New Yorker, correct?
Long Island, New York, born
Long
and
Island,
raised. Yeah.
Strong Island.
Yes, sir.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go. So I want you to take some time to just share with the audience a little bit about your story, but also share about what or who inspired you to want to become an educator today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like you said, I grew up on Long Island, Eastern Long Island, New York, born and raised in a predominantly white town. And my mom was a teacher, so that was always something that was like in the back of my head. She taught elementary and middle school. But my family's of Jamaican descent, and we were just very much like the minority of the minority of the minority in my town. And so I always had a thing for music, things like auditory learning sort of like clicked for me. But when I was in like middle school, neighbors moved next door and they were from Haiti. And so we just became family immediately. And I would be at their house every day, like eating food, you know what I'm saying? Listening to music, listening to them speak Haitian Creole and French. And I was just hooked. Like I had to do this, like absolutely had to learn how to speak another language and specifically French and, all that. Cause I was just so fascinated by it. And these are black
Mhm.
people, right? Like that was my first exposure was the other black people in my town who spoke who were multilingual themselves and who spoke French. So I decided to like take French in high school and ultimately like double majored in college. But that was like the last time I saw black faces as as a student of the French language. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
like despite the fact that my first exposure was this beautiful family from IET, shout out to the Titus family. After that it was just, in class it was France, Paris specifically, and maybe Quebec. Maybe you talk about, Montreal, but other than that, I had no idea that Black people existed in the French speaking world until I went to college and, double majored in French and Afghan studies. So much of what I do as a teacher has been in response to that, has been like thinking of my own experience, trying to see myself in school, trying to see myself in the content and all that as a student, but then also as a teacher, like when I came out and started teaching, I'm looking for these materials, right? I'm looking for the things that would reflect
Mhm.
people whose life experiences look like mine or somewhat reflect my own. And I never found it, man. At best, it would be things that would further sort of otherize black and brown people.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? So much of the last few years in particular has been realizing that like paraphrasing Toni Morrison, but if you don't have the book that you want to read, you have to write it yourself, right? So responding to that experience and knowing that it's a continuing evolution, right? Like I'm 15 years into teaching now, and I'm not where I'll be tomorrow. I'm not where I'll be next year, but I'm definitely not where I was last year, you know?
Wow. That's wow. I always thought you were a French heritage speaker. So you mean to tell me that through cultural immersion, just
Yeah.
being around Haitians and other francophone people, that's how you picked up your French growing
Yeah,
up?
well, mostly. I should say I did. So I would go to my neighbor's house and just listen and hear things. I picked up a lot with them. I
All right.
studied in eighth and ninth grade. I took it in school, but then 10th grade I spent a year in France as an exchange student. So
Mm.
that's
Oh,
where
that's
like the
dope.
bulk of yeah, man. And that was just like a year before social media. You know what I'm saying? So I was like in it, like taking biology class, taking history class in France in French, and it
Oh, that's
was one of the most impactful things I've ever done. Obviously, it was like pivotal in my life. But yeah, I picked up a lot there. But it's important even now when I talk to my students to let them know that I'm still growing in French. I'm still learning. I'm still building my proficiency. I'm still learning about the connections between cultural practices and products and the language itself. And I'm sure we'll get more into that. But again, I'm not where I'll be tomorrow. I'm still growing. I'm still excited about growing and learning and all that. So yeah.
and that's what all the great teachers do, man. They continue to grow and they continue to acknowledge the fact that we are students.
Absolutely.
So often we hear this saying that teachers are reflective practitioners, but then you wonder how many folks really embody that principle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how many folks really do that?
Yeah. And show it, right? Like the kids, you
Hmm.
can tell them all day, but do they see it? Do they see you
Right.
learning? Do they see you modeling that vulnerability to say, like, I don't know yet, but also embracing that vulnerability to say, I'm excited to learn something more. I learned something yesterday, like living it as opposed to just like preaching it and sort of imparting it or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So just staying with your childhood, all of us went through K-12 schooling. All of us inherited certain ideologies that
Hmm.
are, dare I say, problematic.
Yeah.
Um, and then as we got older, we realized how problematic these ideologies and perspectives are.
Yeah.
So, what I want to know from you is, given your K-12 schooling, were there any internal or external struggles that you experienced as far as trying to embrace who you were authentically and showing up in that way?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process to kind of process that, to unpack all of the things that you're conditioned to do when you grow up.
Yeah,
When you grow up in America, when you grow up in specifically the town that I grew up in, that is as sort of insular as it was. So yeah, growing up was tough in that regard, and I think a lot about the ways the sort of anti-blackness that I had internalized, the idea that assimilation is a necessary means of survival. You
mm,
understand what I'm saying? Like in order to get by socially, in order to be validated academically, intellectually, socially, like all that, you have to, or you feel at least that you have to shed parts of yourself and adopt the ways of the dominant culture. And again, so that's America, but I'm also in Eastern Long Island. I'm also, my mom's family is from Jamaica, so there's pieces of that too. My mom's first generation, my grandparents came from Jamaica. So there's pieces of that where, like, my grandparents didn't consider themselves to be Black Americans, right? And they like worked to distance themselves in certain ways. And there's colorism within my family, all that. So that's all like internal, right? But add to it that, like, in school, we didn't. I mean, February we talked about Martin Luther King, we talked about Rosa Parks, maybe, and by
right.
talked about, I mean we made a bulletin board of it, you know, um, and that was the extent of it. So for me, so much of my upbringing and my education, both like formal and informal, was about this like weird sort of duality of getting by in these spaces. And like my mom being this teacher, my mom was like, she had an afro back in the day. She idolized Angela Davis. She was like this revolutionary Black woman teacher, who did a lot to make sure that, or to work toward my brother and I in particular having a sense of self and being connected to people who look like us, people whose lived experiences reflect our own. But sort of me knowing or feeling like those two worlds lived in a parallel way and didn't intersect. Like I had to um, jump from one to the other in a way. So yeah, it was a lot of that, and it wasn't until, like you said, it wasn't until I got older, it wasn't until I left my hometown, went to Temple, come to Philadelphia, North Philly, Temple University, where I started to see, something different within myself, and knowing that I could embrace that. And
Yeah.
again, that's an ongoing process, man. That's something to just things that come up every day. I don't mean to filibuster right now. um, there's things that come up every day, as far as like reconciling the people that I grew up with, and like thinking back and reflecting on interactions with people that I consider to be friends, that I consider to be like
Right.
family. It's like, oh wow, especially post 2016, right? How much has come out? It's like, oh, that's how you feel, and that's how you've always felt, you know?
Mm.
And I got to deal with like remembering, oh, it wasn't a coincidence that I wasn't invited to these birthday parties. Like that was, stuff like that. That's just like shaped who I was, who I am.
So you share all this, and now I'm wondering how all these thoughts, all these memories and reflections translate into your practice
Yeah.
professionally as an educator, particularly a black non-heritage French speaker.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's another layer right there, right? And I'm thinking
Yeah.
about when I was taking French in middle and high school. So just a little bit about me. During my middle school years, I went to school in Ghana.
Yeah.
And of course, anybody who knows Ghana, it's surrounded by all these francophone countries on the
Hmm.
west side of the continent. So literally, French was a mandatory subject you had to learn. That's when I started to learn
Sure.
French around seventh grade. And then when I got back to the States, I kept on going with French because I actually enjoyed it. But what I found
Okay.
interesting was all the French teachers were white, the ones that I encountered.
All of them.
And the way I learned French was very much conventional. We spent a lot of time
Hmm.
on conventions. So, like, if you ask me how to conjugate regular and irregular verbs, like we did pretty much
Got
the
it.
basics, like être,
Yeah.
aller,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pronouns, je, tu, il,
Yep.
elle, nous, vous.
Hmm.
Like, we did all that.
Yep.
But we never really focused on the differences culturally of different francophone countries.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't talk about Afro-Franco countries like a Haiti, right? Like a
Hmm.
Martinique in the
Yeah.
Caribbean, or even the countries in on African continent. So that was just wild to me.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that I think about it and reflect. So
Yeah.
now I'm just kind of wondering from you, when you think about how French has been taught in our schools for the most part traditionally, how do you combat some of the anti-blackness that is
Yeah.
embedded in the curriculum, but even in the
Totally.
practices that we employ in that
Yes.
space?
Yeah. 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 So, I mean, you're touching on a couple of things that do overlap, right? So
Yes.
there in today, there's plenty of people, there's a movement of people who are distancing themselves, or at least reimagining the ways that we can gain proficiency in the language, right? So the things that you mentioned, to be able to tell someone about the rules of a language,
Hmm.
more people now realize that that's not an effective way to actually acquire language.
Okay.
It's very, it's a very small minority of people who learn that way and are able to apply it when they start speaking to someone or when they start reading something, that they're thinking about those rules. That's just not how the brain acquires language. So that's one piece that, like, when we're thinking about equity, when we're thinking about actually serving all of our kids and trying to give them some content that they can do something with out in the world, there's there's the challenge of having teachers and administrators and people and parents and all that reimagine how language class looks. That it's not a list of vocab words that you have to study and you can memorize for the quiz tomorrow and then you forget. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
But add to it that, like, the language, if we treat it like that, it's this thing that sits in a glass case, and it's almost like this artifact that we that's for the elite, and we just leave it there and you don't touch it.
Thing,
So,
yeah.
it's supposed to be this elite thing. And even if language proficiency, even if being able to use the language in context was my bottom line, which it's not, but even if it were, giving context, giving cultural context is the best way to do that. I use this example all the time, that, like, numbers in French are really challenging.
Hmm.
But there's a difference between me saying, "Hey, Kwame, can you right now count to 1,000 for me?"
Sure.
Versus me telling you, Haiti became independent in 1804,
Hmm.
right? Ivory Coast became independent in 1960. So now 60, the number 60 has context for you. You're not just thinking, you know what I'm saying? You're not just trying to memorize, like, the math that you have to do French numbers. I'm using the numbers in the context.
It's
So
attached to some context. There you go.
boom. Because why do you need to? When have you ever had somebody ask you to just, like, count to 1,000, right? But, like, to be able to actually add context to things, to say, all right, Songhua was president from 1960 to 1980.
Hmm.
Like, the number 80 only ever matters when we're talking about 80 what? Well, here's the year 1980, right? So again, that like helps the with the aim of actually building proficiency and having people be able to do something. But now we have this third or whatever, however many layers now that's like French specifically, but languages in general are taught in a way when we do touch on culture, it's purely Eurocentric,
Yes.
you know, always. And that's how I learned too, right? Like I said, my informal education was with the Haitians, but then I went to France, right? And then when I was in school, it was just Paris, 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 and that's it. When the
Mhm.
numbers of French speakers in the world doesn't play out that way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
There
yeah,
are
yeah.
more French speakers in the world who look like me and you than there are not. Um, so the work that we can do to to we're not going to fix, but we can mitigate that marginalization. I always say this: like people aren't inherently marginal; they're marginalized. And so, in my classroom, we center Black people every day. We center historically marginalized people every day. I don't even really talk about it anymore. We just do it. We just talk when we're talking about food. We're going to talk about food from West Africa.
That's right.
Right. And so a last little piece that I'll add to it is that, and I'm still sort of battling with this, but even the fact that we focus on French speaking countries, to me, has a Eurocentric lens, right? It's that the way how I put it is like these Black people only matter because they were colonized by your favorite Europeans.
Mm,
You know what I'm
mm,
saying? And I struggle
mm.
with that. It's like, oh, we're learning about Francophone Africa. And it's like, well, if they didn't speak French, would you care? Do they matter still? You know? Or can
Yeah.
we use French to learn about people? I can, in my French class, we could talk about Colombia. We can talk about, things that are happening with people all around the world. We don't have to limit it to French. So looking at language through the lens of like, it is an opportunity for us to learn more about ourselves, an opportunity for us to learn more from other cultures, learn more from our engagement with and our study of other cultures and people around the world. And that's what it's for. It's not for anything like no diagramming of a sentence will ever matter more than when my students tell me like, oh, I met this guy. I just this happened over the summer. This kid that just came back to school. He's like, oh, I was in France. And I met this guy from La Gambie, and he was so excited that I knew where he's from. And I was talking to him about the capital and all this. And I was like, yo, that's what it's about right there. Like that's it
Mm,
every time. And that dude will never ask you to list all six forms of every verb. You know what I'm saying?
that's
That dude
right.
wants to see that you see him and wants to be, like that's what it's about always. So yeah, so much of
Yeah,
like what
man.
informs what I do every day.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch: you don't have to be an educator or an education based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. Yeah. And it's not often that we frame French as a byproduct of colonization
That part.
in a lot of these Francophone countries, particularly in the Caribbean and also
Yeah.
just on the African continent and just other parts
Hmm.
of the diaspora.
Hmm.
And you were mentioning something about elitism.
Yeah.
And as you're mentioning it, I'm thinking about the linguicism that happens in the French classroom
Yeah.
where, and there are many terms to describe it, but basically we're centering what we believe is a superior form of the language or a superior dialect,
Yep.
and we're making everything else secondary or we're just marginalizing.
Yep.
We know that it happens with Spanish, where okay, if it's not closest to Castilian Spanish
Yeah.
or Spanish that's spoken directly from the country of Spain
Yeah.
or Mexico, right? Chicano
Yeah.
Spanish, right?
Yeah.
Any other Spanish that's deviating from that, we don't even want to mess with it, right?
Yep.
There's
Yeah.
no talks of translanguaging, like Philly Garcia talks about. Like, we're not
Yeah.
talking about that. It's basically no, we doing it this way. So I'm wondering if there's a
Yeah.
French version of this activity
Yeah.
that takes place.
Yeah. There are fewer conversations about it. Um, but
Yeah.
that exists, right? That exists
Right.
even when we think about when people start to have conversations about accentism, it's
Mm.
still framed through this like Western lens. So it'll be like, all right, we we need to stop making fun of Canadians and their accent. And it's like, y'all haven't even mentioned Senegal, right? Like, you haven't even talked about people from Mali who roll their R's like a Spanish R. Not everybody, but
Right.
some people do, right? So, like, even when we start the conversations, a lot of times it's still limited through this like Western lens, which Western is kind of just a proxy for white supremacist lens. And so there's that part. There's also the piece that's like the reality. You mentioned translanguaging, right? And
Hmm.
there's such brilliance there. We have conversations about Spanglish and people who speak multiple languages, specifically Spanish and English. We're starting
Yeah.
to recognize how much genius that is, how these kids who go through the world having this repertoire of language, how brilliant that is. I don't know that we've really extended the conversation to Black people in the French speaking world who
Hmm.
routinely speak 4 or 5 languages. You know what
Yes.
I'm saying? Who like regularly you're from Senegal, you speak Wolof, you might speak some Arabic, you probably speak English relatively well, and French is like, well, of course, right? And so that like multilingualism, the ways how people associate multilingualism with Europeans and ignore the fact, like Joel Embiid, plays for the Sixers,
Yeah.
MVP, man speaks 5 languages,
Five
like
languages.
5.
Sergi
And he's
Baca,
not special.
another
So
guy.
4 or 5 languages, like it's
Makuzi
nothing
Chef,
too, right?
5 languages. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's Black brilliance, right? That's Black brilliance
yes.
that everybody needs to see. The 12-year-old version of me needs to see that, but also the people who don't identify as Black and brown, they need to see and acknowledge the brilliance that is Black languaging around the world and the common ties within it. I'm sorry, I'm going off, man, but you done got me
No,
started.
keep going. This is
But
why you're here.
yeah.
This is why you're
But
here. Come on, man.
yeah, bro, I appreciate you, man. So my wife is Colombian, right? And
Yeah.
and so we talk a lot about, she's a Spanish teacher as well. We talk a lot about like the discrimination within the Spanish speaking world. And one of the things that comes up a lot is the internalized uh what's the word? Like hatred sort of Dominicans. And that you'll even hear Dominicans say, "Oh, they don't speak Spanish, they speak Dominican." Like they find ways to diminish what they do. And in reality, it's just because Dominicans are blacker than other places in Latin America, right? Like it's and the things that they do with their language. If you listen to Dominican Spanish, it's rhythmic. It
Yes, it is.
sounds right. It sounds like drums, right? It has African spirit within it. And that's what Black people do with language. We make music out of language. We make beauty. We make art out of languages, even ones that were imposed upon us, right? And we blend things. We take and we put stuff together, and we take, all kind. Like that's a magical power that has been weaponized against us in all these different contexts, right? And so, for me as a French learner and a French teacher, it's like to continue to see to try to highlight the brilliance that is, to try to highlight for myself, for kids who look like me and for kids who don't, for us to see like the richness and the depth of what Black people do with language and with everything. You know what I'm saying? With everything, all cultural practices, products, and perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, man, for sure. And given that we have all these different French dialects from different parts of the world,
Hmm.
I'm wondering how that translates to assessment. So you're a French
Yeah.
teacher, you have students who may be heritage speakers, and you have students
Hmm.
who may have learned French the way you did, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
directly tied or from one of those favorite countries, but just through immersion, you just picked it up.
Sure.
I'm wondering how assessment looks like in an equitable way when you have
Yeah.
that mixture of students in your classroom.
Yeah. 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 That's a another one that touches on things that I think are often framed as being independent, but that there's a lot of
Hmm.
overlap. So
Yeah,
Um, first of all, like I'm anti-grading as like a principle. Like I
I feel
hate
you on
grades.
that.
I think you know, and I
Just the
hate the fact
subjectivity
that
of
like
it all.
and the fact that it really toxifies the idea of learning and growing. Like kids are such are they're so enslaved by the pursuit of this extrinsic reward that it's like it makes whatever.
Hmm.
So it makes anytime, even if you try not to attach numbers to a rubric, right? They still are thinking in terms of like what their rank is. They're still thinking. So I struggle with that. But the extent to which I have to conform to that, I really do believe in feedback. I really do believe in like a continuum of growth. And
Sure.
so, what are ways that we can use, even like leverage the grade grubbiness to promote student growth as opposed to feeding into these things that we know are inequitable, extra credit if you watch something, whatever. But what about the kid who has to go to work after
Yeah.
school? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, so there's all that. And what I think what comes from that, and a thing that an area in which I've grown a lot in recent years is when you think about language class in terms of being task based, it allows for all these different layers or levels of proficiency to still grow within the same thing. So, for example, I can say the task is to give directions from your house to the school.
Okay.
Now, at your proficiency level, you might, or whatever, a student's proficiency level, they might just be able to speak in one word things because they know how to say right, left, next, go, stop, here. You still got the cab driver, you know what I'm saying? You still got the Uber driver to the destination. You still did it. I can tell you, you accomplished that task. And to take your proficiency to the next level, let's see if you can throw in a couple commands there, right? To say, turn left at the next light, right?
Hmm.
Things like that to build upon that. So if I have, and I haven't had too much experience with this, but when you do have, I haven't had experience with heritage speakers, but I have experience with kids whose proficiency levels are a lot higher. There's
Sure.
still room for me to be able to help them grow to say, hey, when you get into the car, greet the person. You know what I'm saying? Speak to them and say, hi, how you doing? Whatever, blah, blah, blah. You've been driving? Has it been busy today? Like things that you can do and then how to speak in sentences that connect, that may form paragraphs. There's this whole spectrum of ways that you can still accomplish that task. So I can give you feedback and I can validate that regardless of where you are on the proficiency spectrum, that you're still able to do things. You still can like accomplish tasks, and I can still give you feedback that promotes your growth within that like proficiency scale. So I think starting from a place of saying like we have tasks and I'm going to give you feedback and you are capable. My feedback is going to validate, you know, what you are actually capable of doing as opposed to traditional ways of assessing that say like I'm looking for things that you did wrong. You know,
Hmm.
I'm going through and all right, you forgot an accent mark, so that's half a point. Like
That's
people
how they
walk away
did
from
me. That's how
that's
they
how
did me.
right. And nobody learns like that, right? Like not nobody, but very few people learn like that. And even if so much of like So much of what I struggle with is when I think about teaching to the 35-year-old version of my students, right? Thinking about where is this kid in 20 years?
Sure.
Especially given that I work now in like private schools with kids who are going to be in positions of power inevitably. I
Hmm.
think about when you're that doctor and you're dealing with a patient who only speaks Spanish, and all you can say is like, you belly hurt 0 to 10, how much? You're still communicating with that person. You're making them feel seen, right? You're using the language that you have. But if all through your language education experience, you've been told that that's not good enough, like that's bad, you're wrong if you do that, then you miss this opportunity when you are that doctor, right? You miss that opportunity when you are that attorney, that public defense, like whatever it is, whatever position you're going to be in, to not know that the language that you have actually can serve you still. And not just serve you, but help you serve others, help you connect with others.
Yes.
So reframing assessment in such a way that it validates what you have and still pushes you to grow, regardless of where you are on that thing, is a lot of how I'm trying to like reframe stuff.
It's, you know what? It's so dope that you said that because I had a moment like that a couple days ago. So I'm an instructional coach at an international school here in Sierra Leone,
Yeah.
and the kids haven't returned yet. I'm new to
Okay.
the school, so I'm in the process of getting to know teachers.
Hmm.
So I learned that they have French teachers here.
Okay.
So me, I'm like, oh, bet. Let me brush up on my French.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
entered the sister's room, and of course I come in. I'm like, hey, bonjour, madame. Comment ça va? Je m'appelle Monsieur Kwame. Et tout? And then she's like, oh. Then of course she starts to engage, right?
Hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out the kids, like just the number of kids in the class. So I'm like, combien des enfants?
Beautiful.
And she's like, oh, you good. I'm like, nah, I ain't
Yeah.
trying. Like, nah, I'm gonna chill right here. Don't get it twisted now. I
Yeah.
can't do a whole conversation. Give me little phrases here and there.
Yeah.
Negation, nepa. Like I know, like I remember the basics just from high
Yeah.
school.
Yep.
Those are stuck with me. How to conjugate the regular verbs.
Yeah.
But the fact that she felt seen at that moment
Yeah.
and she acknowledged that, oh, like you really are into this.
Sure. Yeah.
That just made her day. That was only 5 minutes of small talk.
5 minutes. That
And
was
that
it.
opened up the doors for just more conversation.
Exactly.
Like, so when you say
Yeah.
that, it's really real. It's about connecting.
That's it. And that it goes both ways, right? Like you just made someone's day. They felt so seen. And we grow when we have linguistic wins like that too. When you're like, yo, I actually just did this person asked me for directions and I just gave them directions. Like I really just I can do it. I'm gonna engage more. I'm not gonna back down the next time I see somebody who needs help with something, right? Or like this, it's this two-way street, but it takes
Mhm.
affirmation. It takes and going back to the piece that I was talking about before is that like even if it's not in the language, so much of in the target language, I should say, when my students know, like, I mean, I deal with this all the time. I meet somebody who's from Colombia, and I happen to know a lot about Colombia because my in-laws and all that. And so when I start rattling off cities and stuff, and like different singers that I know that they know, like people feel so
Yeah.
honored. You know what I'm saying? And when you know
Yeah.
like something, I had a girl. So I taught a class at this. It was like a fishbowl type, like you know, other teachers were observing me teach,
Sure.
and so I had three kids who I'd never met before in this class, never took French in their lives, right? And so it's me and these kids. The first 2 days I had these three kids, and on the second or third day, I forget, they threw another student in there, like 2 minutes before class started. And I'm like, all right, I have 40 teachers in here watching me, and I gotta like catch this other kid out, whatever. But I have 2 minutes, and I just start talking to him, like, hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. I'm, Mr. Ben, whatever. Like, oh, have you ever studied another language? She's like, well, my parents try to teach me their language. I'm like, oh, really? What language is that? She's like, oh, it's a Nigerian language. I was like, oh, word? What language is that? And she go, and I was like, yeah, is it Yoruba? And she lit up. And I'm like, yeah, blah, 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 my friends. And I just read this book, right? And my people from here, and my daughter's middle name is Ayomide. And like all the, this kid was like so nervous coming into this
Right.
class to be the one, you know what I'm saying? The one who didn't know. And it took a couple seconds of me just like, I didn't like, force her to tell me all everything about her identity, but it came out. And the fact that I knew a little something about Yoruba people, you know what I'm saying? And like that I could just connect with her brought down that level of anxiety for this kid who's in this space, right? And so the power of the interculturality, the power of the cultural competency, in addition to the language classroom, the language classroom is a vehicle for us to be able to have that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
man.
I know I'm rambling on you. I
No,
just get
this is
excited about this
good.
one.
You are good. You are good, man. This is what people need to hear.
Yeah.
We don't talk about world languages in this fashion.
Hmm.
So for you to be able to talk about it in a way that's just authentic, but also can
Yeah.
lead to students intrinsically wanting
Yes.
to build their linguistic repertoire.
Yeah.
I think that part's important, just the intrinsic
Yeah.
part of it all, because so much of what we do is tied to some type of external incentive, whether it be a
Hmm.
grade, whether it be some tangible award or what have
Yeah.
you. So to hear these stories of where, like, you want to learn more because of the way you were able to connect with another human,
Yeah.
we got to
Yes.
hear more of those stories
Yeah, yeah, and I
for
love that
sure.
framing, man, because that's it. It's about human beings, It's about human
Right.
beings. It's always going to be about human beings first. Like that's the only, I'll give you whatever grade you. I won't actually give kids whatever grade, but like the grade is never going to matter. Your AP score is not going to matter to me as much. Your score on the National French exam is not going to matter as much to me as you acknowledging the humanity in yourself and in others, right? And the interconnectedness of that.
So I have a question that's just off the dome, right?
Yeah.
What are your feelings about assigning French names to your students who don't have French names? I come from that era where you come into a French classroom, you're
Yep.
assigned a French name. My French
Yeah.
name was Jacques.
Jacques.
Jacques. That was my French name
Yep.
for 2
Yep.
years in high school, and
That's who you
everybody
were.
in my class
Yeah.
had a French name. So, of course, this is me at 16, 17 years old. Now that I'm 40 and I've done some reading and I've actually
Sure.
done some reflecting, I realized that it may have been a bit problematic, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are
Yeah.
about this practice.
Yeah, it's very problematic. And
Okay.
and that, like so many other things, it is problematic, and we all did it at some point.
That's
And
right.
that's
That's right.
that's the thing, whether it was our experience as students or when we first, those of us who were in the language classroom, when we first started teaching, we all did stuff that later we discover is problematic, and we wish we could go back and tell all of our students from our first years. But the it's challenging because, or some of the reasons why I know it to be problematic is because it adds to the idea that what we're doing in this classroom stays in this classroom,
That's
right?
right.
Like you're just here performing. This isn't you. This is you playing this character, but you're not
Yes.
Jack when you leave here. And so, it adds to that. But then it also like naturally you're gonna like, what names are you gonna offer to the kids? Is gonna be I was Olivier, right? Like, are you gonna throw out Amadou? And if you do,
Mhm.
are you thinking about who's gonna be Amadou, who's gonna be Moame, who's gonna be Aminata? Like, how are you doing this? There's no there's no way to do it without causing some harm there. And so let people be who they are, man. Let them have their names. If a kid wants to, so this came up on a Facebook thread recently, just the other day.
Okay.
Someone was talking about kids who, especially who have like non-binary sexual and gender identities,
Mm.
who want to take on a new identity in a class. And like, yeah, like I'll support that 100%. Like if it's the kid self-determining or whatever, a person self-determining, but where it's the teacher imposing this idea, what is the stereotypical French name? Whose names are we, and all that stuff. It's just it it only serves to, again, marginalize, which is a process, right? It only
Hmm.
serves to isolate the learning to the classroom, as opposed to saying, you know, like my name is Benjamin. People who are
Hmm.
native French speakers say Benjamin. And so it's helpful for me to know that so I can recognize when someone's saying it, because that's my actual name. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And like someone will say it. So I'll like often pronounce kids' names with a French accent, with a Frenchified accent, whatever, to some extent. But also like your name is your name, you
That's
know,
right.
and tell people how to pronounce it and correct them every time. And like in every context, you stand by who you are. And I am not an exception to that because I'm your French teacher and whatever.
That's dope right here. And so, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's okay to assign names and use that tool as a vehicle to combat cis heteronormativity.
Uh, I Not that it's okay to assign names. It's okay to allow a student to say,
Oh,
"Do you mind calling me this?" In the
that part.
same way, you know what
Agency.
I'm saying? Agency. Yeah, yeah, yeah. For the
Got you.
student themselves, if a kid comes to me and says, "Hey, is it cool if, boom, here are my pronouns. Call me this, and also when I'm in this space, I prefer that you say my name like this."
Yeah.
I'm always going to honor that. I'm not going to fight them on that because again, it's their own self-determination. I would not assign that though. Um, I wouldn't assign it. And as I'm saying that, I haven't run into this, but as I'm saying it, I'm realizing like I would also have to have conversations if there is a kid who comes up and says, "I want to be called Mohammed."
Uh huh.
And it's like, well, you know what I'm saying? It's not the kid who would be named Mohammed. Um, that's a conversation worth having. But again, I don't think that I can. Am I going to outlaw that? Am I going to tell this kid you absolutely can, or should I help them and give them tools to know the impacts of the decisions that they make when they make decisions like that? You know?
Yeah. And I'm wondering, has the French language evolved to a point where now you have gender neutral pronouns? I know Spanish, they have it now
Hmm.
for those who are non binary.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a French equivalent to that's available, or it hasn't quite gotten there yet. I'm wondering.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there is. And like in every scenario, there are people that are pushing against it, right?
Of
There are people
course.
who, you know, so there are non-binary pronouns. It does get complicated when it's like, all right, so there's indirect object pronouns and direct object pronouns, and then there's like the demonstrative. Like there's a bunch of different things. But what I tell my student, like I always expose my kids to any knowledge I have, I expose it to y'all. You know what I'm saying? And like so that you can pick what works to help you express yourself in the world and to identify with other people and to acknowledge other people's identities and all that. And none of that is determined by like l'Académie Française. That there's no like
Hmm.
board of people that I'm beholden to be like, well, they haven't made it official yet. Like, okay. I also say sneakers and some people say tennis shoes, and like it's helpful to know that
That's
in
right.
English that you know what I'm saying? And some people would laugh at you if you say tennis shoes. And that doesn't mean that laughing at you is okay, but it's just like part of cultural competency is to know that, people have different perspectives. And here's this full repertoire of language to help you express yourself within it. So, yeah, I have, there's my dog walling out in the background. I apologize.
No, yeah,
Um,
no, don't worry about it.
uh, I talk to a lot of teachers. I do a lot of workshops and all that, and a lot of teachers who are like, "Well, I'm afraid to do something because I don't know what's right. I don't want to tell them something that isn't correct Spanish or isn't correct." And it's like, who decided it was correct or what isn't correct? What are you waiting for? You know,
True.
and languages evolve. Languages are in constant states of evolution. So whether 60-year-olds in France and Belgium and Canada have all gotten on board with a particular like strain of that evolution or not, that's not going to determine what my 15-year-old student can do when they encounter people with whom they're going to be speaking French, right? Like they're going to use the language to express themselves and to connect with people.
I hear that. I hear that, man. So I got one more question before we get into our closing questions.
Okay.
What keeps you hopeful in your
Oof.
pursuit of liberation and justice for marginalized people in the French language space?
Yeah. That's a harder question to answer than I want it to be.
Oh
Um,
man.
yeah, brother. Hope. So a thing that comes to mind is I had this question come up recently too. A thing that comes to mind is a line from I forget what song it is, an Outcast song, and Big Boy says, "If you want to reach a nation, start from your corner."
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like my perspective has ebbed and flowed where there's times when it's like, I want to make big systemic changes. I want to be a part of that. And I've been blessed to be able to, I speak at like state conferences and national platforms and stuff, which is beautiful and a blessing. And when I'm in those spaces, I realize that you're up against like a lot of systemic issues, and it's
Yeah.
hard for me to show up and get people to reimagine things. Um, and so I have my classroom, I have my 15 kids, my 17, 18 kids in this room who are going to leave here knowing that in a real way that like Black lives matter for real because we just like learned so much from this thing that we did in class. I learned so much about myself. I was able to, and so that's 15 kids who are going to grow up and go out into the world and serve on juries and you know what I'm saying and vote and all that. And so I think that I feel more hopeful when I can see the the impact, I guess, of my not just my influence, but like the idea of again mitigating that marginalization and seeing that um, when I share that with students, when I'm transparent with my students that like in this class we talk about Black folks, we talk about
Mm.
LGBTQ communities and stuff. That for the most part, like I haven't had students push back on that, and that they see that as like a compelling reason to engage with it. They see the justice piece as like, oh, this makes sense, as opposed to like, Kwame memorized these verb conjugations because it's on the
Sure.
test tomorrow, as
Right,
opposed to
right.
like, here's a couple of verbs that will help you express this idea, and we're going to look at, this holiday that's celebrated in Madagascar and compare it to holidays that we celebrate here in our school community because we want to see the ways that we're connecting with people. Like kids see that as a compelling reason. So that helps the hopefulness. The part of me that feels less hopeful is when, again, when you see things that like what's going on in different states around the US and the fight that you see and the fact that folks win, that wins. That not always, but we're a lot farther from the finish line than I think I thought we were in 2015. In 2014, I was like, okay, we're on a trajectory, and I don't know that that trajectory is linear or that we're like as far along as I thought we were, but I do feel better when the focus is on what's in front of me, who's in front of me, and the sort of like ripple effect that can happen from my classroom and beyond.
I hear that, man. So I'm gonna leave you with this last question before we
Yeah.
close out. What how do you stay true to the teacher in you?
Oh man, that's another heavy one. I think I've learned that I've been blessed in the last couple of years to have my platform grow and to get recognition for some of the work that I do, both like in the world of language teachers and in the school where I work. And what I've realized is that it's when I really focus on the principles of it, you know, Like, I'm less worried about arguing with people and all that, and more worried about, like, I am reading every book I can get, you know? I'm
Mm.
gonna engage, I'm gonna practice, I'm gonna reflect on things. I'm just gonna fine-tune the principle in my principled approach. And with that, even when I do and say things that rub folks the wrong way, which I've done plenty of that, I have done
It,
plenty of that,
it
but that
happens.
people, right? It happens more the more I'm, you know, focusing on those principles. But I also feel like, and I've seen the fruits of it, that like it helps me weed out where not to put my energy, and it also, I think, I can name several experiences in the last few years where uh, someone someone gave me, not the benefit of the doubt, but maybe the benefit of the doubt, because they know that I'm coming from such a principled place, right? Like, even though I'm calling you in or calling you out about this thing, or even though the way how I'm approaching something goes against how you've done it for 200 and something years or whatever, that that they can't really bring into question why I'm doing something or what's my motivation for that. So staying true to the
Got you.
principle, and letting go of the other things, like you can't really control how people receive it and all that, but you can control like how true it is to you, how principle, where it's coming from. Um, that helps me on a day-to-day basis. And I feel like right now, again, I feel like I'm sort of reaping the fruits of that to some extent.
Dope, 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 man. But listen,
Thank
Ben, man, I appreciate you for coming on. Um, I'm proud of you, man, for just the work you've been doing. I've been watching from afar. I'm like, yo, like I remember how this brother, man, he used to be coming in class like with a sideshow Bob look, and then
you.
now y'all clean cut, man, presented at
Nah,
conferences and all that.
yeah.
Listen, man, we all had our faces, brother. We all had our
Yo,
faces, man. But
listen, it was
but all
2003.
jokes
What do you want
aside,
from me,
we
bro?
good. Hey,
Yeah, bro. Yo,
all
thank
jokes
you, man.
aside, man, I'm proud of you, man. I'm glad to have known you. You know what I mean? So just keep on doing what you're doing, and we're gonna support here on the podcast. But before you roll out, let folks know about Afro-Franco. How can they support you on social media? How can they can connect? Let them know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one, likewise, 100%, and we'll get more into that. I love you, brother, and I
Yes, sir.
appreciate you. Any listeners? So I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I will not call it X, it is Twitter. At Afro-Franco 2. And then you can check out, I have a blog, afrofranco.com, where I share all kinds of things and resources and stuff. I would, if I may plug, I run a book club, Afro-Franco Book Club, where we
Mm-hmm.
read literature from the, Black, African and Caribbean French speaking world. We meet like every other month. It has been such a phenomenal space for French teachers and Francophiles. But it starts with us, the interculturality that we want to build within our students, it starts with us. So, I love reading, and that's the way how we show that we're still learning and all that. So afrofranco.com/read. And that's how you have the list of books that we have. We have 3 books, queued up in advance. The next one is in October at some point. I forget when. But yeah, afrofranco.com/read.
All right, yo. Y'all heard it. Afrofranco.com/read. Y'all go ahead and get engaged in this literature. Ben, I appreciate you, man. We're gonna continue to keep in touch, man.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you, man.
All right, man. Appreciate you. All right, y'all. So we're about to end another episode of our Dane Tough Educators Live. Hope you enjoyed it, particularly our world language teachers who tuned in today. And as always, I wish you a good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're gonna do this again another time. Peace out, people.